Good evening, I'm Sean Gibson. This is Table 13 Discussions. You might have heard that the harps, they came back. Well, they never really went away, so we actually had two requests for harps to remain, and in fact, one of them asked for them in perpetuity. So I'm not really going to open this anymore for discussion, but if you do want them, or you don't want them, let me know. And right now, the do want them's want them. So anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for returning. And if this is your first time, welcome back. Or not welcome back, but welcome anyway. So welcome to Table 13 Discussions. There's a couple of episodes before. If you're not quite sure what we're about, go back, take a look. But essentially, we're Catholic. We're proud to be Catholic. And we talk about issues revolving around Catholicism. And we answer inquiring minds, or we talk about an issue that's kind of bubbling up, or different things that within the ministry, within the parish, within our community that we like to talk about. Hopefully we have a widespread, just a little bit more beyond just where we are, to around the US and who knows where. We just want to spread what we love. And we love talking about Jesus, and we love talking about our Catholicism. So once again, thank you. This is Table 13 Discussions. So tonight we're going to talk about a couple of things. Oh, I did forget that I'm actually going to try and expand this into a podcast. So I figured that not everyone wants to watch a talking head for, 15 minutes or so. So if you want to watch for 15 minutes, go for it. If you don't, and you'd rather listen to the podcast, I'm probably going to do maybe something a little bit more extended. And the reason is, I'm driving to work the other day and I'm thinking, dude, I love listening to whatever the podcast is, be it Father Mike talking about the catechisms or Bible in a year or anything like that. So in that case, I thought, sometimes people want to listen to this on the way to work and they can't really watch a video. And sometimes you want to do stuff, So I'm going to start moving this to a podcast. So once the video starts, we may jump to the podcast. All right. So 2.5 minutes and all I've done is waffle. So today, what are we going to talk about? I got a couple of subjects. The first one is actually an Inquiring Minds wants to know. One of the guys asked in the comments from last week was asking about mass times and, have masses always been an hour? So that's a fair question. And actually, if you look back, mass times for the most part have not really changed. First and foremost, you got to remember that masses are not a set time. There's nothing in the in the catechisms or in the general instruction of the Roman Missal. There's nothing in there that says mass has got to be 1 hour. It's just become what we expect. I mean, we expect the vigil masses at Easter and Christmas might go a bit longer. Not might, but will go a little bit longer. But we also, most Catholics in the US anyway, have come to the conclusion mass is 1 hour. So we'll see. But like I said, it actually falls a lot on the bishops as well, or the bishops or the priests, about how long they're going to give their homily. I mean, St. Augustine, he was known to go 3-4 hours on his homilies. So, hey, but he had that following where people wanted to do that. But that didn't start until the early 300s, because you have to remember, prior to that, we were actually an illegal group. Christianity was outlawed within the Roman Empire. And in fact, we were known as atheists. We didn't worship the Roman gods or even Greek gods, but the Roman gods particularly. And so we were no God. We were atheists. We were non-theists. And so non-God. So we were outlawed, and anyone practicing Christianity would be punished. And as I would imagine everybody listening to this knows, a lot of them were executed in some shape or form. Now, a lot of these masses were a lot shorter because they were practiced in the caverns, they were in the caves, they were in the catacombs, they were in people's houses. So it was it was a smaller group. Initially, they would come, they would hear the word of God, they would have the word of God explained to them, they would partake of the Eucharist, and then they would give each other the sign of the peace, and then they would go about the day, that everyone would disperse. So a mass, and I say mass, but that mass actually was a lot shorter than it is now. And then in the early 300s, there was something called the Edict of Tolerance. Now, this wasn't Constantine saying this is the legal legal religion and the religion of the Roman Empire, the Edict of Tolerance are saying all religion will be tolerated. Though you can't get persecuted for practicing your religion, which allowed Christianity to come into the open, which then allowed them to spend a little bit more in the Mass time. Now, in the 1500s, and I got corrected on this the other day, it wasn't the Reformation, it was the Protestant Revolt. Well, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, during the Reformation, as we all know it, or the Protestant Revolt, the Protestantism introduced pews because they were big. Part of their edict was the sola scriptura, scripture alone. So they would study the Bible, and because they were studying the Bible, they needed somewhere to sit. So pews came in because some of these services would last 2 or 3 hours at a time, so they needed places to sit. Until then, there were no pews. So Mass, you were either kneeling or you were standing. So that's probably why they only lasted an hour anyway. So that's kind of where we are on that. Now, interestingly enough, I know actually several African priests, and I've talked to them about Mass in Africa, and they were telling me that people would walk distance from, well, they still do, they walk a distance from a neighboring village to come to Mass, and they may walk an hour, 2 hours to get there. So they're disappointed if a Mass only lasts 1 hour. They want the Mass to be lasting to 3-4 hours, and after that there's a meal, there's praise and worship, and then they walk back to their village. And in Africa, a Mass of 3 to 4 hours is not unusual because the whole day is dedicated to God. And you know what I was saying about earlier about Catholics in the US, it's like 1 hour and I'm out. Imagine if we had that concept that, hey, I want to go and learn about God. I want to go and listen to God. I want to go and worship God for 1 hour. No, I want to go for 4 hours. That's what I want to do. And anything less, I'm disappointed. Man, that's an awesome thought. And if only we could do that, but we'll get there. In fact, you look around the congregation on a Sunday, you get to about the 50, 55 minute mark, and you start seeing this. You start seeing people checking their watches. Is it time to go? So anyway, so I hope that answers the inquiring minds want to know. Masses, have they always been an hour, or when did that change? It changed around the early 300s with the Edicts of Tolerance, but they're typically always been about what we have now. Okay, so the second thing I wanted to talk about was, what's your calling? What's your ministry? And this actually plays off from last week. If you mentioned this, if you remember, I said we're going to talk about the goat and the sheep. So the goat and the sheep, or the separation of nations, actually comes from Matthew 25, 31 through 46. And in that, a quick summary, God has all these people who claim you are God, you are Lord, and they recognize him for who he is. However, he splits them and he says, on my right are the sheep and on the left are my goat. And he says to the people, the sheep on the right, he said, you fed me when I was hungry, you clothed me when I was naked, and you visited me in jail. And they're like, Lord, when did we clothe you? When did we feed you? When did we visit you? And he said, what you do for the least of my people, you do for me. And you'll be basically rewarded with eternity in heaven. Paraphrasing. And then he turns to the goats on the left and he says, you did not feed me when I was hungry, clothe me when I was naked, or visit me in prison. And they're like, Lord, when were you hungry? When were you naked? When should we have visited you? And they said, what you did not do for the least of my people, you did not do for me. And basically they're going to be condemned to hell, to the eternal fires of Gehenna. So we as Catholics, we understand this as doing good works. Yes, it's great to have faith, but it's required to have faith, and we go through the grace of God. However, part of our calling is to do good works at that same time. Now, what are good works? Because I've got people within the Turbil 13 community who literally go out, clothe people, feed the hungry, visit them in prison. I mean, that's what they do. That's their calling. That's what they're drawn to do. And That is so admirable. I mean, I love that they do that, and I'm glad that they do that. However, that's not what I'm called to do. And I hate to say it like that, but that's not what I'm drawn to do. But good works does not stop at, what going out and feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. Good works are ministry. What is your ministry? Why should we do ministry? Matthew Kelly talks in the Dynamic Catholic book about 7% of the work in a Catholic church, the work in a Catholic church that is done by 7% of the people. And if we could just increase it by 1%, all these millions of extra hands would be involved. And it is such a beautiful concept. But how do we get those people engaged? How do we get those people engaged? How are we getting you engaged? I was sat a couple of weeks ago. We were in the sacristy and we were talking just before Mass, and we were looking out, and the church was full. And in discussion, it came out that pretty much the numbers in our parish, at least, and this is not representative of all parishes. I can only speak for my parish, but our parish is pretty much up to back to pre-COVID numbers. So our attendance is there. Where we're suffering is ministry. We're struggling. We're not going to say struggling, but we don't have the ministers that we used to have. And when I say ministers, I'm talking about across the board. I'm talking about Eucharistic ministers. I'm talking about lectors. I'm talking about ushers. I'm talking about in the garden ministry, in the Adoration Chapel, which we talked about last week, in Catholic Daughters, in the Rosary Guild, in the Circle of Mary. All these things, the people who used to do this have kind of drifted away, and we're trying to fight to get people back. And it's kind of like, why? Why is this there's all these people are coming back to Mass. Why is it so difficult to get people to come back to Mass or back to a ministry? A catechist. We have plenty of catechumens. We're fighting to find catechists. We have plenty of teens going through confirmation. We're struggling to find catechists. That's the battle. So why is that the problem? Why is that a problem? Why are we struggling to do this? And that's the question. And there's several reasons that I've kind of heard. One of them is, I'm getting too old and I just can't do it. Well, that's actually a very valid reason, And then there's some that will be like, well, I thought I'd let somebody else do it. And I kind of have a problem with that, because on a Sunday afternoon, you hear the priest or the deacon or the ministry lead stand up and say, hey, we need more, fill in the blank. We need more in adoration. We need more catechists. We need more lectors. We need more proclaimers. We need all these things. Come and speak to us at the back. And you look at the back and there's nobody there. And people they do the avoid. If they look down, nobody can see me. So when I talk to people, it's like, well, it's time to let other people do it. Well, it's obvious that nobody's doing it. So why aren't you stepping up? Why aren't we stepping up? Why aren't we stepping up as a community? Because if we remember, Christ never said, let somebody else do it. He could have quite easily said, yes, I am who I am, but let somebody else do it. And even more, when Christ tells the apostles, go forth and spread the gospel to all nations, if they'd have said, well, let somebody else do it, where would we be right now? I wouldn't be talking in this camera. We wouldn't be going to Mass on Sundays. We certainly wouldn't know about Christ. We wouldn't know about our potential salvation, because we let somebody else do it and it just fizzles away. And we're seeing that right now in our parish. And I think that's representative of our archdiocese. That's representative of the US. I can't obviously speak to those numbers, but that's how I feel. So the goat and the sheep, I see the ministry as part of that clothing the naked, bringing food to the hungry, because food to the hungry can be spiritual. And if you're bringing the Eucharist, that's definitely bringing food to the hungry. but hungry in spirit. And we do that through ministry. You know, we talk about the vocations that we're suffering in our religious. You know, we're suffering to get priests, nuns, deacons. You know, we're trying to fill those spots, but we're also struggling to find lay ministers. So don't be a lay minister because, you know, you want to look cool and go, well, you know, I kind of hold a place of authority. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to do it with a servant heart. We do it for other people. You know, I was reading the gospel the other day, and it was about, and I'm going to get this name wrong, the Cyprian woman who approaches Christ while he's in Tyre. Now, if you know where Tyre is actually about 20 miles south of the Mediterranean. It's a good distance north of Jerusalem, and Christ goes there. And actually, Tyre was a city that was never even conquered by Israel. It was a pagan city. It was actually typically Canaanite, and the Syrophoenician woman would be Canaanite and probably of Greek origin and spoke Greek. They were typically pagans and idolatrous. That's kind of what Tyre was known for. And in fact, Jezebel, who married King Ahab in the Old Testament, came from Tyre. So why was Christ going there? Well, he walks into this house and he doesn't want anyone to know, but she finds him. And the beautiful thing is he challenges her. It's like, this is, you know, about, you know, the children need to eat first. And she counters with, you know, even the dogs under the table eat the scraps of the children, implying, you know, I'm entitled to know what you have to say. I want to know. I want to feed from you. And she calls him Lord. And he ministers to her. Now, if you think about that, initially he goes there and he doesn't want to be seen. But when she comes to him and she said, "Yes, Lord," he says, "Yes, I will minister to you." Christ wasn't too tired. Christ didn't let somebody else do it. Christ didn't pass it off to the apostles. Christ ministered even though he didn't want to be seen, even though he was tired. He just walked all that distance. But more so, Christ was Christ. We are called to be Christ to others. We are called to minister to others. That's our role. So I challenge each one of us, all of us. Here's a challenge. Get back into ministry. If you're not in ministry, get back into ministry. If you are in ministry, do another one. It's coming up to Lent. I mean, we are not far. We're just a couple of weeks away from the beginning of Lent. Instead, why don't we pick something up for Lent? Do an adoration hour. Offer to help. You don't have to take on a ministry full. Offer to help with the catechumens. Offer to help in confirmation. It's about finding your ministry. Do it. Let's all do it. My name's Sean Gibson. This is a Table 13 discussion. God bless. Goodbye.